Good afternoon. I think the majority of us are in here. There might be one or two others straggling in. And we're going to get started. It's my privilege to introduce to you the Reverend Jeffrey B. Saddington. Jeff is a chaplain with Austin Hospice, and he is a colleague. He is a Presbyterian minister. Jeff holds a MBA, actually a BS and an MBA from Drexel University, and he was a executive with a 35-year career at Johnson & Johnson before leaving the corporate world and attending seminary. He attended Austin Presbyterian Theological Seminary. He is an ordained Presbyterian minister in the Presbyterian Church USA, and for the last 12 years he has been chaplain at Austin Hospice. He's deeply committed to this mission of hospice and palliative care in Central Texas. He and his wife Carol have been married for 48 years, and they've been associated with Holt International Children's Services for over 40-plus years. They've traveled around the world on behalf of orphaned and at-risk children, and they have adopted 3 of their 5 children from Korea through Holt International in the 1980s. Jeff, welcome. It is a pleasure to welcome you here to San Gabriel Presbyterian Church. Thanks for coming out on this wonderful, beautiful day. We love days like this.
Beautiful day. Bill, thank
God
you
bless
very
you.
much. Thanks also to Debbie Wonder, for organizing this. You have made it so easy. One of the best things a speaker can hear walking in is that you look like your picture. So that's always a good way to start, because the gray hair that I have earned is from the 5 kids that we had who were all teenagers at the same time. So when people say, "Sorry, Reverend, I really shouldn't say those words," I say, "I've heard every word you can possibly say." So thank you for coming out. You are hardy people here in this, what I heard, we're going to get a polar front come through. So we will speak together. I want to make sure that I'm answering questions that matter to you. So after a prayer, I'll ask if there's anything that you want to make sure we cover, and I'll just try to work that in. I know Debbie and some greeters gave out some tablets at the door and some pens. And I want to warn you that if you open this pen, this is fresh and new, but when you have a fresh new gel pen, it has a little bubble on the end. And you might think I gave you material that was substandard. So get that little thing off it, and then hopefully you'll be able to write whatever it is that you want to write, okay? We do have some information up here that I would offer to you to take home. At the very, very end, I'll just describe the pieces so that you know what is here. And I just wanted to start by asking how many of you, this is definitely the audience participation part, how many of you have had a loved one in hospice care? Now, see, look around there. I would guess that's 50, 60%. How many of you have had someone cared for by a palliative care team? Many fewer. There's Chris in there. There's about 4. We're going to describe, Hector, what that is, okay? That's the whole purpose of me asking that question, actually. How many of you have heard, before Bill introduced me, how many of you have heard of Hospice Austin? 70, 80% maybe? And the last question, how many of you have heard of Christopher House? Maybe 50%. Okay. Well, we will touch on all of those things, and it helps me to know, just so that I know just how involved you already are in this type of care, because that's critical. I'm sure that many of you are from this wonderful congregation, San Gabriel, but there also may be a number of you who are from the community who are people of faith and here, or just people who don't have a faith journey, but have heard about this and wanted to come, you are all perfectly welcome. And our goal today, and I'll show you some objectives that Debbie and Bill gave me very carefully months ago. So we're going to try to get all of that done. But you know, today in our adult book study at the church where we worship down in Austin, there was a phrase in here that I thought would be really appropriate for you. This book is called An Altar in the World. It's not important that you know that, but that's where I'm going to quote from. The author is Barbara Brown Taylor, who is just a wonderful author and an awesome speaker. But she's in here talking about and reminding us that certainly come Ash Wednesday, when Pastor Bill or someone else in the community is putting ashes on your forehead, we are reminded that from dust we came, and to dust we shall return. And that's humbling, it's powerful, it's faithful for Christ followers. But she also then says, the good news is that most of us get some good years in between. And so what we're going to be talking about today are those good years in between. And I will hope that at the end of this, you will feel that palliative care, hospice care, helps to stretch those good years. Hospice care does not seek to have someone live one day longer than they should, or one day less. But what we try to do in both palliative care and hospice care is allow us to live our life to the fullest, to be able to live our story to the very end. You know, when we get sick, that begins to take away our story. People who know and love us know that we're ill, maybe are afraid to talk to us about it, but that's what they're thinking about. And they forget that maybe we taught Latin for 40 years, or raised horses, or taught children. That story starts to move out to the edge. And that's a shame, because that story is rich. And part of living life to the fullest is to make sure we're always doing the most important things right to the very end. Okay? So we're going to be talking about all of that. And let us begin in prayer. Gracious and merciful God, we thank you for the blessings of this gathered people today. Be with each of us as we speak together this day about serious illness and how we can be caring for each other and be as faithful to you as the day is long. May my words, Lord, reflect what you would wish spoken here. Thank you for the grace and kindness you will wash over us this afternoon, and for the strength you provide us as we move through our lives here on earth under your care. Please, Lord, take fear away where it exists and replace it with trust and confidence in you as you work in each of our lives. Amen. So I would like to make sure that you walk away with an answer to any burning question that you had going in here. And I would be sad if you walked out with something that I didn't address but really mattered to you. So is there any question? I'm not going to necessarily answer it right away. I'm just going to try to take a note and try to make sure that we touch on it before I go. Any questions? We're going to show you a chart of that, because that actually came up in a conversation while I was getting prepared. So average stay, we're going to talk about that. Yes? Okay, we will talk about that too. That's a very important element of what Hospice Austin does. Okay? Any others? I know Jerry out there has a burning one. He already told me that. And I said, why don't you be our seed questioner so that perfect. So he's asked about being a volunteer, and we're going to talk about that in the Hospice Austin segment of this. So that'll be an easy question to answer. Any others? Over here and then there. Yes. You're on. Yes. Okay. So we're going to talk about Christopher House, and I wasn't there in 2000, so my reference will be a little different, but we'll do our best to describe that. And yes, sir. Yes. Yes. In fact, what the gentleman is talking about, a term that you may have heard or used already, is advanced directives. Advanced directives. And there are three major ones. This has nothing to do with your finances. This is all healthcare related. We will talk about that. And in fact, at the end, one of the suggestions I'm going to have is that may be something that you would consider doing here. We have a program at St. David's Foundation pays us to bring into the community. So it's a service that we very much are dedicated to bringing to anyone who needs to understand that type of work. Any others? Okay. Yes. Yes. Now, this was a question about what is palliative care and how is that different from hospice. Hector mentioned that also lightly. I have a little bit of information on what insurance does, but it is my prayer that I never fully understand the insurance plans here in this country. And so far, I'm doing a pretty good job of not fully understanding those. But rest assured, I'll give you some basics. And we have a person within Hospice Austin who is, as you would guess, an insurance expert. So there's lots of ways to get good information about that. But I'll do my best. Anything else? Okay. Well, this title slide, the most important thing is what's in quotes. And that expression is what I hear most often. I'm not making this up. At a time of death or shortly after, or actually as it's approaching, this is the kind of words that we will hear. We wish we called you sooner. And it does get back to the question of length of stay. Because sometimes our bodies are ready for hospice long before our minds are. And so this sentence here, we wish we called you sooner, is an important part of what I am hearing just as a caregiver. So here's some objectives today that Bill and Debbie gave me on a much warmer day back about 5 months ago. And the bold words are important. We're going to talk about some practical things. You can see it with palliative care versus hospice care. Exploring some myths and facts about them. Questions to consider when you're thinking about a hospice agency or a palliative care practice. Hospice Austin is really the only nonprofit standalone hospice, but there's 36 for-profits. I mean, there's plenty to choose from. And then we'll talk some spiritual things, spiritual and emotional issues when people are facing serious illness. What's the right time to start talking about it? And these are questions that we may not think about until we're in the weeds. We don't know what to do. We'll have a little chance to talk about that here. What resources exist that might be of help? And then, how could the church be of help? And so that's what we will seek to cover today in addition to your questions. And as people of faith, I thought we could always start on some biblical truth that we could be resting on. And this is a passage from Psalm 62. Find rest, O my soul, in God alone. My hope comes from him. He alone is my rock and my salvation. He is my fortress. I will not be shaken. And I've used this with people that I meet. And you can almost hear that rest land on you. Because when you're in the weeds, it's sometimes hard to remember whose strength you really end up relying on for those people who are Christ followers and Christians and anyone who has a higher power that matters. So, the reality of serious illness, when it hits, there's a million questions. These are a few of them. What is this? What can be done? Who do we even begin to talk to? And you get all the emotion that comes with that. You see them, and I could have filled 2 circles with them. Anxiety, shock, fear, grief, anger, helplessness, depression, loneliness. It's all real. Some people even find peace because they've been thinking about this for a while, perhaps. And then the now what? What do we do? Who do we turn to? Is faith part of the equation or not? Or does faith fail in this? Who do I turn to? So, I've put them in here in a very clinical way, haven't I? They look very separate. But they're not, really. They're all sitting on one another. They're interfacing with each other. You're going from practical things to emotional things, to tears, to questions, to where do I turn? Who can help me? Everything really hits at once. And it hits hard. So here's a quote from someone named Barbara Carnes. I underlined a little bit of it, but it really all works. Our emotions have a great deal of power over us and can influence what we see, what we hear, what we do. Knowledge helps. Knowledge helps. That's what we're dealing with today. But it's our emotions under the surface that guide us and tends to block us from seeing what we don't want to see. Even people that have experience with others with serious illness, sometimes say, I just didn't want to see where this has gone. And so it's understandable. I mean, we are emotional people. This matters. So, a story. I had a patient named Danny. He was probably 60. He had a terminal illness. I think it was kidney failure. He was one rung above homeless. He had gotten off the streets and into a small apartment. The reason I mention that is not important. Hospice Austin welcomes any and all. Everybody gets the same care, whether you have insurance or not. The point is that his little apartment was really sparse. There was hardly anything in it. But he had a picture. He had a picture that was sitting on a little table. So in the course of my visiting him, I say, Danny, who's that? He says, well, that's my son. I said, tell me about it. He says, well, we haven't spoken in 10 years. And I don't know what to do. I said, I'd like to resolve that. I would like to restore that. I would like to reconcile that before this is all over. But there was anger, plenty of anger on both sides. You know, that emotion that blocks what we're trying to see. And so Danny and I would just chat. And I didn't know his son. I was only beginning to get to know him. I knew that was not anything I was going to fix. That's one thing chaplains learn pretty quickly, and pastors too. You can fix very little. You can fix very little. So I would visit him, encourage him. I'd poke around a little bit on what was going on in his life. Finally, one time I said, Danny, I'm not going to be here in 2 weeks. I'm going to go visiting my son in Atlanta. But I'll be back. I'll be back in about 3 weeks. So off I went. I came back. Danny, how are you? You'll never guess where I went, Jeff. Tell me. I went to see my son. He gathered some money. He had gotten a bus ticket, and he went. And that healing began. Now, did I fix that? I never even used the word fix. I never even said, Danny, what are you going to do to get this thing right? I did ask him, what do you think reconciliation looks like? He did that, and with the help of the Holy Spirit, I would offer. But that is what happens when people let their emotion shift to, what do I really want to have happen? What's most important to me? And so that gives me hope when that kind of thing happens. So, we'll get back to the practical now, okay, for just a minute or two. There was a survey done, you can see at the very bottom, by the St. David's Foundation, and they spent a lot of money surveying Texans statewide. And some of these results, I think, are important to share. This was just done earlier this year. We told St. David's as Texans that we prefer to die at home, 76% of those responding, and that we would wish for a natural death as opposed to prolonging life with all possible options. We don't want to be a financial burden to our families. 77% said that. We want to be comfortable. We want to be without any pain. But we don't want to place all of the care burden on the family. Makes sense, doesn't it? And we want to be able to afford the care that we need. Lastly, and we want a trusted person making end-of-life decisions if we can. Now, it might be family, or it might be your neighbor, it might be a schoolmate that you knew and loved 70 years ago. So it's not always family. In fact, some cases, somebody says, I don't want anybody in my family making a decision for me. I know who's going to help me. Okay, so that's some survey results. And these are important to what we're going to be talking about here. However, only 37% of Texans, we learned, said that their end of life for their loved one went the way they wanted it to go. Now that's sad. Sad. For these reasons, inadequate insurance, they died in a hospital, not at home perhaps. They weren't prepared for what it looked like. Or their wishes were not completely followed or honored. You know, we say how we want this to end, but we're not in control at the end. So it's important to make our wishes as clear as possible with people who can help us with that. You know, as an example, if you don't want to be resuscitated, but you don't have a DNR in your home, and they call EMS, those great people earth angels they are, they're going to come through that door and they're going to do everything they can to bring you back. And that may not be what you want. So this is important to make sure that our wishes are clear. So, in conclusion for this survey, you could really draw that a lot of us are unprepared for what happens at end of life. 87% says it's important to have wishes for end of life, but only just less than 40% have done so. A lot of them have not had this conversation with a doctor. You know, doctors are great. They are trained to heal people. And sometimes these are hard conversations for a doctor to have. Not throwing any cold water on them. They do wonderful work. But sometimes these are conversations that are tough, maybe because they think the patient or the patient's family is not ready to hear that message. And so 3/4 of the people know, or at least have heard of hospice, but only 1/3 know what palliative care is. Okay? So, this is who I represent. That was one question that we had a little earlier. Hospice Austin has 3 major forces. One is Austin Palliative Care. We'll describe what that is. The middle column is the typical hospice care of nurses and chaplains and social workers and doctors, and we're going to describe that. And then Hospice Austin's Christopher House. That is located down on MLK in the center part of Austin. It's not too far from baseball field for the UT folk. And it is a small 14-bed inpatient facility 24/7 with a doctor, nurses, chaplain, social worker, CNAs, 24/7. And that is for folks who are in a critical state and need that type of care and can't get it either at home or in a facility. And so we bring them to Christopher House. Okay? So we will cover each of these in a bit. This is an important graph, and I'm sorry if the writing is a little small. I didn't own this slide a few weeks ago. But this is what I see as a full measure of care. So let's go from, this left column of words. We try to prevent illness. Then we try to cure it. We try to prolong our lives. We then have an option of using some palliative care, which I'll describe, perhaps hospice care, and then bereavement care, back to the question in the back. So the little graph from the very left is really showing that we're just trying to prevent things, that blue triangle. We're preventing illness by going regularly to the doctor's visits. But at some point, if we get a serious illness, we start pursuing curative care. You see that in the green. Well, then it becomes more urgent as it gets into yellow, and becomes more urgent as it darkens into a more orange. And that's at the point where hospice may take over. And so you're going from a preventative, potentially a palliative care, to a hospice care. And then that red part is after death. And that red triangle is bereavement, the support of the family as they need it. One of the questions was, how long? Well, we believe from Hospice Austin that we will provide bereavement care as long as you need it. As long as you need it. Not just for the primary caregiver, but anyone in that family that needs it. Most people find that a year is sort of all that they might need. Many don't need it at all. Some just need it for a few months. But people who need support in grief, surviving the holiday, things that bring up triggers, emotional triggers, that really should have attention paid to them. We want to be there for you. And it can be a holiday, a birthday, an anniversary. It's the music, the smell of a sweater. All of that can trigger emotions that we say, wait. Something's going on here, and I need to pay attention to that. So bereavement is an important part of what we offer, and we have professionals who are dedicated solely to that care. I want to give you an example. And this is one that's pretty recent for us. Last November, a 76-year-old male started having conditions, symptoms, slurred speech, tongue weakness, choking, coughing. While he was eating, he would cramp. After 45 minutes, his legs would start to go numb. They went to doctors, and they started to believe that this was ALS. So he eventually got connected to Austin Palliative Care, and for months, they helped address the symptoms, but also many other elements of how to best care for him. I'm going to show you in a minute. But a mid-June serious choking incident led him and his caregivers and Austin Palliative Care to say, perhaps a consult with hospice would be appropriate. They ended up choosing Hospice Austin to talk with, but they could have gone anywhere. Okay? The daughter said, he's not ready for hospice. No. He's not ready. But he said, I know what's happening. And I want to stop eating and stop drinking. And so they encouraged him to go to this Hospice Austin consult. They brought him on. And I was at that first meeting where the hospice people were talking about care. And he was adamant. He said, I know what's happening. I'm a professional guy. I've done all the research. But by this time, he could not speak clearly. But he had a whiteboard. And this man was writing furiously, showing us, wiping it. And if somebody would have said, oh, no, you really don't want to stop eating and drinking, he would have exploded. It was very clear to us. He knew what he wanted. And we honor people's wishes the best we can. But one of the things that we wanted to do to help him was he thought he was going to die in 2 weeks as soon as he stopped eating and drinking. We don't know. So he came on, and through actually months of care, he began to understand what this process was going to be. No one forced him to eat. No one forced him to drink. His wife was with him. She knew what he wanted. His children, though, were in a different place. They loved him beyond words, but they wanted anything to not make this happen. So part of what our care was to engage the family through Zoom. The chaplain arranged that. The chaplain who was assigned to him was almost just a temporary guy covering. And it helped bring the family along with his decision. I mean, in this Zoom, he wrote on his board, I have hit the wall. How's that for a message? He eventually ended up at Christopher House because his wife could not care for him at all. And so the last week and a half of his life, he was surrounded by people who were expert in giving this kind of care, honoring his wishes. And he got to the point where he couldn't write, couldn't speak. So he'd blink his eyes, he would touch, and he ended up dying with his family around him. Tender care at Christopher House. So that's an example of the continuum. And again, it doesn't have to be Austin Palliative Care. It doesn't have to be Hospice Austin. That's who I represent. But there are people out there who can help you do this. And so we offer this as an example of what that might look like in this very, very different kind of example. He had a playful side. And so he left us with a motto. He wrote on his board before the last couple weeks. If you have to go Hospice Austin. Now, I don't know whether that's going to make a bumper sticker, but he was loved on right to the last breath. So let's get into the detail of this. What is a serious illness? It's a condition, there's a lot of fancy words up there, but this is an illness that affects daily functioning or quality of life for the person who's ill or the caregiver. And so when things start to change with how someone functions on a day-to-day basis, you're beginning to look at what is likely a serious illness. There's a lot of us that have it, 45 million. They're not yet hospice eligible, which we'll talk about what that is. They're not hospitalized. And you know people like this. You love people like this. And it's obviously a growing population. So when you do have a serious illness, not only the patient, but those that the patient lives with and who is loved by, it's not just physical. It's emotional. It's spiritual. It's financial. There's decisions to be made. There's communication to be made clear. And you've got a caregiver, or maybe many, to be concerned about. So here's another example. 63-year-old female, newly diagnosed stage 4 pancreatic cancer. She had real pain, back. It was very emotional. It came suddenly. Sometimes that happens. You know, you feel something going on and you end up in the hospital, and all of a sudden it's advanced. It's not something that's, years away. They had questions about health insurance. They weren't on Medicaid. Do we do chemo or not? What kind of surgery is possible? All of these things. And of course, the husband is overwhelmed. The husband is overwhelmed. This is a very clinical look, though, isn't it? So we need to be resourceful. We need to be looking at all of these things. And for this person, they ended up getting connected with our palliative care group because our group is able to not just deal with the physical elements of stage 4 disease, but the emotional things, spiritual things. I happen to be the chaplain for Austin Palliative Care. So if someone wants to speak about spiritual things or just wants another ear, I may get called. We also can point people toward financial resources if they don't have it. We can help them with decisions and communication. Here's what palliative care is. And this hopefully will get to your question. It's specialized. It's not just cancer treatment. It's not thoracic. It's a specialized part of medicine. There are doctors, nurse practitioners, of course, bank of nurses, social workers, chaplains. The goal is to improve quality of life. But it goes beyond that. Yes, we're attending to physical and emotional needs, but palliative care allows the patient to continue all their other treatments. It's like adding another player to the team. And so if somebody needs dialysis or chemo, those interventions still occur. And that's what makes palliative care so valuable, because you begin looking at the whole person, not just the cancer diagnosis, not just the lung disease, not just the Alzheimer's diagnosis. So here's some questions on how to evaluate a palliative care group. Is it team-based or is it a solo? Are you pulling in all the possible elements of care? How are they seen? Do you have to go to the office, or do they come to you? Austin Palliative Care comes to our patients. That doesn't mean you still don't go out necessarily for chemo treatment or dialysis, but your palliative care medical component is going to appear at the home. How often? What do we do in an urgent situation? What role do they assume? Do they prescribe medication? So all of this should be asked if you're considering pursuing a palliative care practice. So the one at Austin Palliative Care is a nonprofit, as I said, supported by St. David's. It's a subsidiary of Hospice Austin. It is home-based. That's what community-based means. Wide variety of illnesses, 21 years and up. Most, of course, are older folk, but I did speak with a 25-year-old the other day. This is critical, the consultative model. It's a consultative model, meaning you retain your own primary care physician if you wish, your neurologist, your oncologist. But palliative care would take on all aspects of those palliative care needs. It's currently covering 4 counties, and it's in the home, apartment, assisted living facility, or memory facility, and it's very accessible. Same-day calls, physician on call, 24-hour type response. And I'll just list the telephone number. One of these brochures is for palliative care if you have interest. 512-397-3036. That website is just austinpalliativecare.org. Let's move into what hospice care is. This is available to anyone with a life-limiting illness. Now here has a little, there's 2 qualifiers. Medical physicians have to determine that your life expectancy to enter hospice is 6 months or less. Now that's not a precise number, as many of you know. People who come to hospice in the very last days are not going to last 6 months. But my dear mother-in-law came on the hospice in Philadelphia, and she was on it for 15 months. And I've had patients on it for 3 years. Now, none of those are gaming the system, I promise you. But sometimes when people come on hospice care and they've stopped chemo, they've stopped various remedies or attempts for comfort or cure, that the illness just slows up. And so they may be on for longer than 6 months, as many of my patients have. And it doesn't conflict with other benefits. Like, there are things that you're not pursuing anymore. There's no more curative care. And the whole insurance industry will shift from curative support to hospice support. So it's paid for by the major insurance companies as well as Medicare and Medicaid. It's not here to add a day to your life or to take one away, and it's not home health. And there are some agencies that combine them too. That's wonderful, but it is not a home health service. So what is it? Patient-directed care. The ALS example is one. We were focused on him. We were also clearly wanting to support the rest of the family as evidence of how the chaplain helped and how we met with all of them. But it is patient-directed. We wanted to make sure that we were focused on what he wanted to accomplish, even as sad as that was. It's not curative, but it is pain management. It is comfort care. It is team-based. So you've got doctors, you've got nurses, you've got CNAs, or like nurse assistants that come and help bathing, grooming, chaplain and volunteers, social worker. There was a question about volunteers. I started as a volunteer with Hospice Austin a long time ago. Hospice Austin has about 200 volunteers, and we need more. Anyone who comes as a volunteer is trained extensively. I think it's like a 2-week training period. in all kinds of things that are really, really important to know and to at least be aware of. They have 2 training courses per year, and I think the next one is in February. You could always call Hospice Austin on this brochure, 512-342-4700 if you were interested in that. If you were a volunteer elsewhere in this great nation and you moved in here, they would still need to train you, but it would be a wonderful preparation for the type of work that you would do, and it's very rich. It's a very rich experience. I was a volunteer for an elderly woman. It's interesting for me to talk about an elderly woman, isn't it? But I'd go over to her facility. She just needed somebody to talk to. I'd show up, and I almost didn't have to say a word. I would just say, "Hi, Mabel, how's today been for you?" And man, she'd just take off. It took 5 or 6 months for her to even ask me, "Now, what do you do?" So, I just had to bring my ears, my listening ears and my empathetic responses, and she was just as happy as could be, at least for the hour that we had, 2 hours. I was also a volunteer for a man who had pancreatic cancer. He was 40-some. He no longer had a family that cared on him. He lived alone, and I was his wheels. And so I would show up with my truck. He was in a wheelchair. We'd throw that in the back, get him into the front, and we'd go off to HEB. And he would get into those little carts and chase people down in the aisles, And I tried to get a conversation going on my first trip, driving down the road. And this guy born in Texas, and I said, "You gotta love football. What's your favorite team?" "I hate football." "Well, it's gonna be a long ride." I said, "How about baseball? You like baseball?" "I love baseball." "Okay. Well, I can talk sports with anyone." And so I said, "Okay, favorite team, favorite player," and he tells me it's the Texas Rangers. He'd be smiling today, wouldn't he? So I got home and I wrote to the Texas Rangers. And I said, "I've got a patient here that loves on you guys, and can you send me some stuff? Because he's really ill and doesn't have anybody loving on him." So in a week, I get this box of stuff. Had hats and balls and all kinds of stuff in it. And a personal note from the team that said, "We are with you." So I bring this to him. He gets mad at me because I was trying to help him. I just said, "Joe, we are in this together, and I just want today to be a great day." And so I ended up being the one that took him to the hospital because he had no one. But that's volunteer work. You never know what tomorrow's going to bring. So if you have a heart for that kind of thing, I encourage you to think about that, pray about that, and give us a call if you want to be a volunteer. Okay? As you can see, we provide support for the patient and the families involved. The ALS example is one. Now, Friday, I visited a woman who was quite ill, and she and her husband, he is her caregiver. She has uterine cancer. They've been married 38 years. They have 2 children, adopted. So far, that's sort of a clinical cold summary of her, isn't it? Well, she is a children's librarian. She met her future husband because he came in and didn't know where to find a book. And so that started a lifelong relationship, and they love on each other to the very hour. She, though, when I walked in, as a fill-in type of guy, I didn't know what to expect, really. And she's laying on the sofa, not able to physically move. So he lovingly got her up, just propped her gently there on the sofa. And I had read a little bit about her. She loves zebras, riding horses, of course, books. She loves singing. She loves crossword puzzles. And as long as she can still enjoy some of those, her husband is giving them. And they love funny movies, comedy shows. They were watching Funny Girl when I got there. And she also loves duck jokes. And so I captured this little picture. So I said, "You do? Tell me one." She says, "Well, okay." She says, "When do ducks get up in the morning?" At the quack of dawn. You get the prize. Well, I laughed as hard as I could. They both laughed as hard as they could. And they'd been telling this joke for a long, long time. But she was loving the life that she had the best she could. But, I said, "Tell me how you are doing with where this is going." And she said, "I'm tired, and I want to go home. I'm tired, and I want to go home." So I said, "Tell me what home looks like." She said, "It's gold. It's perfect. I won't be crying there. I won't have any pain there." I said, "This sounds like a lot of things I've read in the book of Revelation. No more crying and no more tears." And so she, wished she was out riding horses. But she was living life to the fullest with what she had and with her loving husband next to her, who I understand often says, "I'm the favorite husband you've ever had." And he is the only one she's had. So I hope you get a right answer for that. So, some myths about hospice. Does it mean giving up? I would say a loud no. I would say that it really creates a different strategy for how you're going to live life to the fullest. And that you seek to follow your own wishes. It may give you a chance to talk about your wishes for the first time. It doesn't have to define the patient's story, that illness. That's why I mentioned it early. Because you, as visitors, perhaps, of friends you love, you might be afraid to visit because you don't know what to say. Just go and be present. Say what's most important to you. What have you enjoyed? What was a happy time in your life? Tell me what was hard. Because sometimes things that they've gotten through that have been really hard to do or to bear gives them the strength to get through it now. You build strength through difficult times. And now may be the time that you use that strength to get through it. So the team, as I've mentioned briefly in some examples, they don't face on this illness alone. The patients are not facing this alone, but do get a chance to regain whatever it is that was important to them. Another myth. Is it only for the last few days? That was a question in the back. That's also a very loud no, and I hope you can see this. The table on the left says 10% of people will die, and once they're on hospice, they'll die within 2 days or less. And I would contend it's, as I mentioned before, it's because their bodies were ready for hospice long before this. Another 15% live on hospice 3 days up to about a week. A quarter of the people on hospice live from a week to 3 months. I'm sorry, to 3 weeks. And then another quarter from 3 weeks to 3 months. 15% from 3 months to 9 months, and another 10% over 9 months. So it's not just for the last few. And the sooner we can begin to see that a serious illness is getting so serious that it qualifies for hospice, that's when the conversation can begin, even if it's not something the patient is ready to do or want to do. So does it cost more? No. It is paid for by insurance. You see Medicare, Medicaid, private insurance. If you're on a Medicaid, if you're on a Medicare Advantage plan, I know you need to move over to a Medicare plan. But that's what social workers and the team helps you do. You're not facing this yourself. Now, Hospice Austin is a nonprofit, and it accepts a larger percent of people who are charity care. So we're out raising money all the time to try to pay for all the patients that we have who don't have 2 nickels. But they get the same care as anybody who has insurance. And of course, some people come as a self-pay. So here's the kind of things that you could ask about. Same way I did this for the palliative care group. Asking about a hospice agency. You can ask about their staff. What happens after hours? At 5 o'clock, is it the same nurse who visits me during the day who now has to respond at midnight? That's not a good way to staff. So, as an example, Hospice Austin has a separate team that comes on at 5, doctor, nurse, nurses, social worker, chaplain, that work all night. That's what I did for 10 years. And then the regular team comes back on at 8 because they need to rest. You can ask about volunteer services for whatever agency you may interview. Are they accredited? What about aftercare and bereavement? What types of care? If you need a Christopher House type place, what would that agency suggest? Plus, talk to others. You have lots of friends who have gone through this just by the hands here in this room. So here's a little bit of information. And again, the brochure for Hospice Austin would give you that information as well. Hospice Austin has been in business since the mid-'80s. So it's really sort of the granddaddy of hospice care. It was started by Dr. John Sandbach and a lot of other folks at Texas Oncology. Shortly after, actually, the whole concept was begun in the UK. These people with foresight said, we need something like that here. And so that's when it was begun. So if you were sitting with somebody, you get into some of the spiritual things that would help you perhaps start a conversation. One of the things that, and you put it in your own words, but I think it's always important to be asking the one you love, what's most important to you right now? Not necessarily what you're worried about yet or what's happened in the past, but today, what's most important? And they might say, gee, I'm just looking for a Cold War. Or I want to reconcile with my son I haven't spoken with in 10 years. That helps frame where you can go. And by them telling you, you have license, you can now enter into that conversation. What would you like this journey to look like? What kind of help do you feel you need? What gives you joy? Duck, duck, jokes. You can focus on those things, and you can always say, how can I be of help to you? And when people offer that, it's an invitation. It might be food. It might be taking somebody somewhere. It might be coming by and playing cards or games or watching a ball game. It takes many forms, as you might guess. key is being present, that gift of presence. So, some possible resources, and you could triple this list. Certainly Bill and the staff here, and all the deacons, you have pastoral care resources. And I Googled the Presbyterian Church USA website the other day, there's so much good stuff on there. 56 articles, books about congregational loss and grief, and a lot of things for children. There's community counseling services. Have you ever heard of Wonders and Worries? It's a very good one. It's geared to children. It's been around a while. High quality folk. And it really helps deal with some of these tough things when their moms and dads are seriously ill. We have our own grief support services, and just being good at selecting the right agencies, the right practices, the right practice to be of help to you. So I put together a few things. And this actually, we brought this up when we first began. You could consider hosting a session on advance directives. And there's 3 again. Medical power of attorney, out of hospital DNR, and the advance directive to physicians. And so St. David's pays us to come. We give forms. We talk about this. You can sign up there, and you're not signing up with us. These are forms for you to take. My wife and I got these in place 15 years ago. We've helped our children get them in place. And so it's not a bad thing to be talking about. We wanted to make sure that our kids who are unmarried were going to have somebody able to speak for them if they were in a position where they couldn't speak for themselves. And we're marrying them off as fast as we can so that we can tear up that page. Consider hosting a session on grief. One of Bill's great friends at Hospice Austin is Nancy McCraney. She's an expert and leads our team on bereavement. So that could be rich if that's something that you thought was useful. Down at the church where we worship, Westminster Press down in Austin, they're starting a series, so I'm stealing it from them, called Parent Your Parents. And this woman who's just newly on session has been caring for her parents for 5 years and has learned way too much on what it required. And she says, we need to do this for our congregation. So in the next month, they're going to have 2 sessions on the legality of it, options of care, financials, how do you deal with siblings, how do you deal with passwords, all this stuff. And then they're going to do a thing on the medical side, and then they're going to have a session on advanced directives. So it doesn't necessarily have to be just a session like this. Think of what you all need and what your congregation needs so you can help love on them. And, this gift of presence can take many forms. I think it was Debbie that I was talking to about Stephen's ministry. That's a wonderful effort. It takes a lot of work. You need the right leader. I mean, it's very highly structured, but the gift of presence of a Stephen's minister or the deacons that you are filling this room with, all of that is such a great resource. And so I just encourage you to just consider what else might be helpful to your congregation. And that biggest regret that I've heard is we should have called her sooner. And we can always rest on biblical truth. And this is one that's, I find, it just lets me pause. Isaiah 41, 10 and 13. Do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be afraid, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. I will help you. I will uphold you with my victorious right hand. For I, the Lord your God, hold your right hand. It is I who say to you, Do not fear. I will help you. And so, friends, let's make sure that we've touched on all your questions, and then I'll take any other questions you might have. Touched a little bit on insurance, I think. Really, almost any kind of major carrier you have, as well as Medicare and Medicaid, should provide you with the kind of insurance that you will need for that type of care. That's not long-term care insurance. That's very different. Some people have that and some don't, but that would be a great help to paying for some of the assisted living costs that are involved. Advanced directives, I think we touched on. Christopher House. I don't know what it was like in 2000, but it has not changed in the 12 years that I've been there in terms of course, upgrades and things that need to be repaired and fixed. But it's down there still on MLK. There's a lot of building that's going on around it, but it's still sitting there as the little 14-bed facility that it is. There are dear people there. It's a tender place. And so, I would encourage you, if you have any interest in understanding what Christopher House looks like, to go there. One Sunday, I was on call, and I got a call from the director, and they said, "Jeff, we want you to come down and marry someone." Okay. When? Said, "Well, we're not sure how long this dear lady's going to live, but she and this man here would like to be married." I said, "Okay. May I speak with him, please?" And so he got on, and he's talking away, and he finally admitted that they'd already been married. Because I was saying, "Do you have a marriage license?" Because I get into big trouble if I try to marry anybody. I don't know how many Bill has married without a license, but or Chris. But I said, "Unless you have a license, friend, I can't do it. But you can always get one." He then said, "Well, we've already been married, and we technically didn't get a divorce." I said, "Oh, okay. That changes things." So I said, "You don't really need to be married again. You're married. But how about if we do a renewal of relationship?" Because their children wanted very much for them to be reconciled. And so with the director's help, the nurse supervisor, we decided for the next day we would go, and they would invite all their friends, quick. The kids would get dressed up, the man got dressed up, the woman in the bed got dressed up. And we wheeled her bed over to the window. And Christopher House, if you're familiar with it, it's sort of a U shape, and so many of the rooms look out over a garden. And so there was a fountain there. Gathered guests were in the garden. She was up against, the door was open, windows were open, and they renewed their vows. We arranged snacks, had flowers. That's what can happen at Hospice Austin's Christmas. And so you just try to be as patient-centered as you can be. Yes? Yes. It's, if you're familiar with the UT campus, there's a great baseball field out at 35 and Martin Luther King. And if you go out Martin Luther King going east about a mile, no more, it's tucked in on the left. Yeah, it's a tender place. Really special. I'm sorry if I didn't make that clear. Yeah. Any other questions? I want to make sure I've touched on everything you were asking. Length of stay, you had a sense of that. And Jerry, do you know what to do with volunteers now? Where's Jerry? Oh, Jerry's out there. He's probably calling Hospice Austin now to sign up for February. We would very much like to have more volunteers, particularly up here. You know, we try to combine volunteers with patients where there's similar interests, and you can imagine it's trying to fit people together. And these volunteers are sweet and kind, and most of them have been through this on one side of it and now want to give back. And these are salt of the earth. Other questions? Yeah. 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 Right. Right. Yeah. I believe, one of Chris's great friends and a member, a part of this congregation, not a member, is Andy Dearman. And, Andy's tucked back down here. Yeah. He got caught. So, talk about God's grace and mercy. I passed his Hebrew test by the skin of my teeth. But when someone would ask him a question that he wanted a couple seconds to think about, do you remember how you would begin to answer? He'd say from the book of Amos, I am not a prophet or the son of a prophet, but here's what I'm thinking. So, Chris, I believe that we have a list of people who would do that pro bono, but of course we can't recommend anybody. So we suggest people, sort of like if you're looking for a caregiving, we can't recommend caregivers, but we have a list this long of people that would be available for that kind of thing. So it's the kind of thing that when we get into an advanced directive conversation, we say very clearly, this is not a financial directive. You need a will that's done. You need a durable power of attorney. You need. But it's not something that's in our lane, so to speak. They panic. And I've heard that exact situation where somebody says, we need an attorney quickly. And so we do our best, but there's only so much that you can do. Yes. So maybe that's worth touching. Here's the steps, or at least the steps with us. If you called that number, 512-342-4700 for hospice care, you said, we would like to talk about hospice, they would very quickly triage what your situation is. Are you just curious? Or do you have someone who really needs to have this conversation? Or is it family members who hate the thought of this? And you've got to just sort of deal with what the facts are, so to speak. Or what are the myths that they're thinking? Yeah. Right. Exactly. So sometimes when a nurse wouldn't be available, let's say, and they just needed information, not a medical evaluation, because I am as non-medical as they get, I would go, because so much of it was emotion anyway. And I'd say, look, I'm not a prophet, not the son of a prophet. I'm not a medical guy. Here's what it is. Here's what it's not. And if you wish, let's have a nurse come and do an assessment. Yeah. Yeah. Medicare. Right. And this is true of any hospice. It's not just hospice. Yeah, but palliative care is covered by insurance and by insurance. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah. It's an emerging skill that was needed because there's little glue when you get into a serious illness that's not yet hospice qualified, eligible. Yeah. I mean, Chris's point. Chris's point, the will. Okay. Mm. Yeah. One of the things that's up here for you to take, if you wish, you may already have your affairs fully organized. I know I've started to try to do that, and boy, is there a lot of work. This booklet we have put out called Organizing Affairs, and it's a way of just sort of getting things in a, I mean, you still have to do the work, but it helps organize some of the tasks and some of the information, locations. I mean, have you ever thought of how are you going to have your son or daughter manage your password? Oh my gosh. I mean, all these things that are now, a newer thing. Yes. Okay. Yeah, absolutely. You're a hero. Hmm. That is, what a great gift you're giving. You're awesome. You're awesome. Well, that's a great gift to your family for sure. But it's a great gift to all of us hearing that, and a great gift to the congregation should any wish to be part of that kind of learning. Does the packet go out with the Christmas card or? Wow, that's awesome. Any other questions? You've been really very kind to have me. Yeah.
You
All
talked
right.
about having a story.
Yeah.
Can we start doing that as a group? Is this something that as a community people can start doing that?
Of course. I have seen churches who, churches are wonderful and they continue to change and new people come. And so some churches have figured out how to pull in new members by beginning to share some of their story with others, the public parts that they would want to share, so that you begin to get to know Carol, who's my wife, a new member of this church down in Austin. And so I think anything that you're able to share that you're comfortable with sharing in your community is wonderful. I mean, connection is what makes congregations strong. And so, and if they don't know us, then it's hard to feel comfortable and get all that you can get out of this wonderful faith community. So yes. Yeah. Anything else? That's quite all right. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. We have hot coffee and cold water and fresh cookies. You can visit and talk about what we learned today.
And there's the folks out here that are helping the scouts and the young people of this church by selling pumpkins. And so I'm going to put in a plug for them because it's cold out there. And I've seen people wheeling pumpkins away in a cart. So you've got to make sure you get one before all the good, perfect ones are gone, okay? Thank you for letting me come. Yeah. I hope it was helpful. Yeah. Please feel free to take